My name is Beth Toby. I'm the arts manager with the city of Beaverton. And this workshop series is part of a collaboration with the city of Hillsborough and an organization called Tualatin Valley Creates. We're going to do some brief intros, and then I have a few questions for them just to get the conversation going. I'm going to start with Reverend Masser. Reverend Maya Masser is a healing facilitator and fine artist. She's been making art since she was able to hold a crayon. Looking back, Maya says she has always used art as a form of therapy, survival, and self-discovery. Even her very beginnings of making things, she attributes to her soul's need to create a world less painful, safer, and more beautiful than one she experienced in her physical life. While some might say that Maya's early childhood experience of sexual abuse was a bad thing, she attributes the existence of the two things she derives most pleasure from in her life today to that difficult childhood. Those two things are her art and her connection to the so-called invisible or spiritual world. Both of these for Maya are the keys to her healing and thriving and what her work centers around. As an artist and interfaith minister, Maya has found a life path that incorporates all that she holds dear. She is delighted to be here and share with you today. And then our other guest speaker, Maria Huppy. Maria is a mouth painting artist. She became a quadriplegic in 2000 when a windstorm caused a tree to fall on the roof of her minivan while her husband Mike was driving. Her passion for painting started when her mother gave her a paint by numbers kit and further expanded when she showed her cards from the Association of Mouth and Foot Painting Artists. Most of her inspiration comes from the beautiful garden and pond in her backyard, where she has added goldfish and koi. Daily visits from the squirrels and birds bring the backyard to life. Before the accident, she enjoyed being out in the yard and gardening. Now, flowers grow on her canvas. Watching the flowers, koi, and goldfish have not only provided beautiful therapy, but also color and movement, which inspire her to recreate when she paints. And then we're going to start with Maya, if she'd like to just introduce herself and share some of her artwork with us.
Where to begin in 5 minutes? I do have a PowerPoint presentation of my artwork, and I don't have the time in 5 minutes to talk about the artwork. What I will say is, as was noted in the bio, art really saved my life. And it saved my life in that it was a world I could create that was more pleasant than the world I was living in. I'm perfectly happy to and willing to talk about anything and everything. So any questions are welcome in the question period. What I'm going to do is I'm going to whiz through my art slides. And if something strikes your fancy, then make a note and we can talk about it later. I'll say a few things, but not a lot of things as we're going because we don't have very much time. So I'm calling this art as an antidote for fear, anxiety, stress, loneliness, grief, and pretty much anything else that ails us. In my personal life and in my practice, art is a gateway, and it's an incredible gateway that can take us very deep. The first slides I'm going to show you are from my teenage life. And I'll just say a little bit. So this is obviously a pen and ink drawing. And to me, looking back at it, at the time I didn't realize, but looking back at it, I see that it really portrays the way that as a 15-year-old, I was looking to experiment with life and find different aspects of myself and see what different experiences could show me of who I was. My art often does that. This is another thing from that time. It's an etching. I'm just going to whiz through here. This is an illustration when I applied for art school. Here's a little detail of that illustration. I did a lot of work around girls and birds. And again, at the time, I just thought I was making girls and birds. This is an etching. But in fact, looking back, I see the ways in which I felt trapped and felt that my wings were clipped and was looking for an expression of growth. So when I made these pieces of art, I felt better, but I didn't know why at the time. That's a woodcut. That's a monoprint. There's another monoprint. Monoprints became fascinating to me because they're one-offs. So you do a crazy thing, you print it out and you're done. You don't make a second print of it. And I was in the midst of a time when I was making a lot of reproductions of the same thing. So that was a sense of freedom. That's an oil painting. I went through a phase of making art that was all pen and ink. And a lot of it was black and white. And at that time in my life, this is actually from a logo from when I was teaching natural childbirth education. But at that time in my life, there was a sort of a blackness, a darkness overriding me. And eventually that transformed itself. But this is from a poster for a drum and rattle making workshop that I taught. This is a logo for a friend who is a weaver. That's another logo for somebody who made beads. And this was when the pen and ink started to have some color in it, and not by chance. It was also when I began to do some deep work in therapy. That's just illustrations for doing projects with people. This is a cover of a magazine, detail, mother and child. Here's a drawing that I did having no clue what it was connected to until I got done with the drawing and looked at it and said, that's me. I'm a mermaid. I belong in the sea and I feel trapped in a house. Yes, it's a pretty house, but I need to get out. There's an oil painting. This was when I was raising my children. This is a dance, obviously dance. So this is a series of paintings that were commissioned by two psychotherapists, and I won't talk long and hard about them, but you can see there's the difference between those two, where the prayer is headed. There was a phase of painting angels when I was beginning to work with people and their unseen guides. So that was a sort of self-healing validation in making the art and being willing to come out into the world and speak about these things that had been very private to begin with. This was a painting done for a friend who was seeking the love of her life, and she wanted a fellow mermaid. So I made her a mermaid painting, and she did the visualization. And sure enough, she manifested her love. That's a healing work fetish. I do a lot of drum and rattle making, and that's always done in conjunction with whoever I'm working with and what their particular needs and intentions are with their work and their own healing. I also do work with people in guiding you as the client in making whatever it is you need to make for your work. This is the beginning of a big project, which has a long story, and it is a very deep healing process for me. It happened around the time of my mother's death, and that's a long story also, which I won't tell. So outside of the studio, we had this sign up here that's "What's sacred to you?" and people wrote what was sacred to them before they entered, and had, again, before they even came in, found themselves in tears discussing what was sacred and important to them. I heard so many beautiful life stories. Those are just a couple of things that people thought were sacred. We have Jesus and Sophie and Maiva JJ. So this picture is in here because of one particular thing, and it's this couch. So in the center of my studio, this was when the show was up, was this sofa. And the reason the sofa was important was because people were in this massive, it was a huge building, four floors of studios showing their work, mostly selling. And I was not selling, I was just showing. And there were altars that went with each of the images. People came in and would just flop down on that couch, person after person, and sob and laugh and tell me their stories. And that couch became this sort of, I don't know, holy place of transformation. One of the fascinating things was, because this was about women, I had a lot of response from women. One of the fascinating things was the men who came in, and the number of men that came in and just sat in this, as you see, sort of reverent way, and then later came and told me some incredible story of something that was elicited by looking at the artwork, and would weep. I felt very honored to be in the presence of people's deep stories. it was amazing. Okay, so these we're going to go quickly through. This was actually personal healing work for me in recovery after 7 years of covert narcissistic abuse. And art was the way I saved myself. You can see the paintings got really dark, and then they became lighter again until finally we felt good and strong. One last little bit, one of the ways that I work with art and people on healing journeys is through altar building. I've done a lot of altar building in my life, and assisting people in creating altars has been one of the big gateways to healing that I've experienced personally and that I've been able to share with my clients. I could talk for hours and hours, but I won't. Except for this one last thing, which is that the adding on game is a game that I developed with my siblings when I was a little kid. And when I began working in hospice, I brought it to hospice, and it was a magical, magical thing because I did it at first with just, this is a very good friend of mine. Her name is Mary. And she did this game with me and was so moved by it and went through so much. It brought up, one of the things that it does is it puts you in a place where you're not actually talking to each other, but you're looking down. So there's a little sort of sense of safety, and people begin to speak when they're in a place of safety. So she shared a lot of things, a lot of healing happened. That went to her family, healing happened there. I went away for 2 weeks and I came back, and she had taught everybody in the nursing home to play this game. Conversations had happened that had never happened before. The nurses were jumping up and down. It was this magic little thing of just this game that opened this incredible healing gateway for the whole community. So that was a really fun discovery.
Okay, now we're going to go to Maria.
Okay. This is my new website. I had a website before this one. So it doesn't have all my information in here. There we go. Oh, here's my husband, Mike. As Beth mentioned, we were in a car accident. It's actually been 20 years as of last December. So kind of a landmark. Here's I talking about some of the inspirations from our backyard, where pretty much a lot of that's just been planted by hand, and friends and family and people. And this is a pond. This backyard was just totally flat when we moved in, and we went ahead and put that pond in. My husband ended up putting that in and slowly added fish to it. This one is one of the first paint by numbers that I did. That after I did this paint by numbers, I started doing my own not paint by numbers. This is just freehand, free mouth. And then we're doing these Mexican shell flowers. I just really enjoyed the detail and spending the time to go in and play with colors. And this one, my husband loves fishing, so it's a 5x7, and I just worked at it. And then this was taken from a picture in our backyard. But I went online and I was looking around different pictures of butterflies and found something that was able to get put right on the flower. This, I was able to get a scholarship from the Mouth and Foot painting after I submitted those paintings before this one. And so I've been able to do these paintings for different holidays that were coming up. This is a painting that I had my husband, I was working with darkness and light, and so we turned the lights off in the house, and I had my easel up, and then we took some pictures, different angles, and I thought this was really a good angle to show the shadow on the apple and the light in the room and the color that I used to paint with. All right, this is one of our koi taken in our backyard, and it was a great picture, so I decided to paint it. And there's the painting of it. It's oil painting, and my husband is actually a home inspector, so one of his clients actually
was involved with the North American Japanese Garden Association. And she came over to meet me and went ahead and put this on the cover of the journal back in 2014, 2015.
Nice.
And then I got the wonderful opportunity to be involved with Open Studios. And with that, it brought people to my space, my studio, and I was actually able to interact with them. And it was a lot of fun. It was a lot of fun talking with anyone and talking. There is my studio. I got things set up, and the easel that is on the right there, I'm able to move around with my mouth with an electric gadget there when I work on bigger art. And so we had that set up. And this is one of the flowers that more recently painted. And this is another oil painting, 16 by 20. I did a brief study on just playing with some hydrangea. So I did 4 little, well, they're not little, they're all 16 by 20. And this was just really, really close. I thought that'd be cool. This is an original picture my husband took up in Alaska. And I took that picture and I painted this. I threw a boat in there and some seagulls and some more color. This is another picture that my husband took when he went fishing. And I went ahead and painted this from that. And just kind of keep the key figures, but added color and the less detail. This is a movie showing me painting. It's a larger piece, but I end up getting the fish on there and then just kind of throwing some color in there and starting to paint the rocks. I wasn't really going by an actual photo other than the main fish that was put in there. And this is me getting a little close with some detail. And I got the rocks done and the fish on there. And it's on my bigger easel. And I have a picture of what I'm painting from on an iPad that I use. That's another better example. That's right next to me. So then I will use that and use my husband was taking different angles of me painting. And there it is, almost done. That was my largest piece. And then I did this one after that's on a 3-panel. And this is me getting real detailed with rocks. It's a 16 by 20 that I just really enjoy the fish and being able to swim around. And actually we got a free turtle that was in our pond. And so I did this painting tribute to the turtle that was in our pond. And this is a picture of, speaking of healing, I painted this picture for some friends that their dog on the right was not doing well with his health. And this was before he passed away that I painted it. And then now my sister's dog, and they were just really good buddies. And he ended up passing also. It was just and this was also painted for somebody, and the dog had passed.
Thank you for sharing that, Maria. That was such a treat to see both of your artwork, and they're just beautiful. You both used metaphors, and whether or not you realized it or not, I wanted to follow up with both of you to talk a little bit more about that. Maya, you talked about a gateway and how your artwork was a gateway. And Maria, you mentioned something about light and dark, and I'm not sure if that was intended as a metaphor, but that's how it struck me. And I'm just curious if you guys would both be willing to talk more about that, as well as just your own personal healing journey and how your artwork and your art practice has helped heal you personally.
I can. Yes. So let's see. What's the answer to the question? That's a big, wide question. What did you mention? You mentioned that I had said something about art as a gateway. Is that what you were talking about? Yeah. So when I say gateway, I mean that it can be, so first of all, when we're talking about art, I showed you my visual art, but I'm also a dancer, an actor, and a poet. So those are forms of art that I also use. And all of those things I see as gateways. I think poetry is a beautiful gateway for healing. And when I say gateway, what I mean is that the art is whatever it is in the moment. It's the paint on your hands or whatever the thing is, but that through the making of the art, something is processed, something is brought from inside to outside. And I guess I would point that in the direction of the work that I do now, which is working with people managing and healing grief and loss. And one of the things that happens when we experience grief and loss, other than it's really hard, is that there's a weight on us, and it can almost feel like a physical weight. And there is something in the magic of creating something outside of us, whether it's intentional expression of the grief or whether it's just creating something into which some of our energy goes, that takes some of the energy of what is in us and puts it outside of us. And that gives us less stress and more energy to work on healing. And B, it gives us something outside of ourselves that we can look at and reflect on. And so for me personally, the act of making art is an act of healing. Does that make sense? I can show you a really quick little example of that if you want. I recently went through an experience of another layer of stuff from my past related to my childhood abuse and ongoing unpleasant things in my home. What happened was somebody sent me a film that I hadn't seen in a while, and I saw it when it came out. It's a really beautiful, powerful documentary called The Act of Killing. And in the very end of that film, there's a scene where a man who has killed people talks about it as if he's telling you that he had a picnic yesterday. Meanwhile, his body goes into an expression of the feelings that he's denying, and he retches in this most hideous way. And I saw that film and I couldn't get it out of my head. And for 2 days, I just felt this horrible feeling until I realized I feel like there's that inside of me. There's some kind of retching of something hideous inside of me. And that's what you see in this first painting. So I said, I'm going to paint that thing. And I painted that thing. And as soon as I painted that thing, I burst into tears. And when I burst into tears, something released in me because I looked at it and I said, it's over there. It's out of me. I vomited that thing out onto that canvas. And the next thing that happened was I felt this sense of stillness. So I painted that. And when I painted that sense of stillness, I realized that in that stillness, there was a calmness, a clean feeling from having regurgitated that thing that I needed to look at. But I needed to dissect that further. So I did this. And this is a painting that I called Sleuthing the Virus of disenfranchised grief. So in dealing with grief, there are different types of grief. Disenfranchised grief is any grief that isn't publicly or socially acceptable to express. And that could be any number of things. In my case, it has to do with loss of people that I care about that you're not supposed to care about. I work a lot with the so-called unlovable, people on death row, child molesters, etc. So when somebody who was a child molester dies, nobody cares and everybody's very excited that that person is now dead and gone. However, that person is more than the sum of their actions that we see. So in my work, there's a mourning for the loss of those people. So this is a painting in which I dissected all the aspects of my grief and what I vomited up in that first painting and was able to look at it intellectually. As soon as that painting was done, this happened. And this, for me, was an integration of the wounds. It was an understanding. I had done the emotional and physical barfing, and then I had gone to this sort of spiritually tranquil place, and then I had dissected it intellectually, and that brought me back to the cave of my heart, which is what I called this painting. And a redefinition of that mending of myself, of saying, okay, I released what I needed to release. I've examined it with my mind, and I can now come back to my own heart. And what that led me back to was a sense of great joy and hope and freedom. And I didn't realize until I was putting this little thing together for you guys today that that's a very childlike drawing right there. And it looks like a child also. And I recognized that there was a healing for me through all of this intellectual processing and art making of mending that little girl inside of me from way back when.
Yeah, Maya, that was really powerful. Thank you.
Yeah, I love how you went through that whole entire process and didn't just stop at the retching, because I think that's where a lot of people do stop, right? Like, oh, I got that out of me, you know, and
Yeah.
that's that. I know for sure that, I use music as a way of transforming emotion,
Yeah.
as you know. But while Maria's pulling up her website, I really appreciate seeing that visually, like that entire process end to end. It's really, really powerful.
That's
So
the,
that's a process that I take other people through when I work with people with art.
Yeah, it would be neat to see it like a full, like have you do like a whole workshop.
Yeah, doable.
um, the home and my story page are pretty much been already spoken of a little bit, but um, I was 35 when I had my car accident, and I pretty much, went day by day and with trying to get off medication and just live and not be in pain. And that was helpful once years had gone by and I started getting with the suggestion of my mom to come and to paint, which is where I got my website, Coming Alive with Paint, because before painting, it was, I went more day by day than getting involved in painting and getting lost in the painting. And I wasn't thinking about anything else but painting. And that just made a huge impact in my life. And as far as the comment Becky made about dark to light, it was actually similar to that feeling, but it was more of the color in that really stood out to me. You could see what flowers was what I started with, and I just being a gardener and going out, and I know all these flowers, and my mom actually lives across the street, so she would bring over an iris from her backyard and stick it for a still life. So I get that painted. That's actually from my backyard. Someone took, and that's the picture that was in one of our yards. So I really enjoy painting the pictures that I have locally. That's called Betty's Love, because it was my mom and arose my mom's yard. And so all of these have a meaning to me and a connection with somebody that maybe took it and I painted from it, or so there's fish, which on the other gallery, that was one of the next topics I started doing, was because we had koi and it was in our backyard, and I was able to really nail down some of the emotion from the fish, whether it's their mouth or just the swimming or the flow of things. And it was like I was in there swimming with them. And then the turtle was really fun, just because the turtle would come out of the pond every now and then and just brought something else into the pond with the other fish that get along. But that one was a picture taken from the pond. And that's a free piece that I do.
I think that, especially in the Zoom world that we're all in right now, it's easy, at least it's easy for me to forget that nature can be so healing as well. I'm in a digital world almost every day for 8 or 9 or 10 hours. So that's a great reminder. One question I have is, what advice would you give someone going through a difficult time now?
I know that my personally, as far as the internet, I know that's been a huge, that has exposed to a lot of other artists, and to see how other people paint inspires myself more, and I would encourage anyone to use that and see, because like me painting with my mouth stick, as opposed to somebody else that just
you know, is more emotionally inside than me physically on the outside. Um, but just, and then using color, you know, using the color to, you know, it can change your mood and, you know, just the way you're feeling and how, what the topic is you want to share is something that's more positive for others.
Really good question. And I really appreciate your tip there, Maria, to say about the colors and how much colors can affect us. I would say it's fair to say that everybody's going through a hard time of one sort or another right now. And the top things on my list would be to say, first of all, make the space to be with whatever that hard thing is. You know, it's so much in our society to say, try and feel better immediately without actually dropping in to say, what is it that I'm feeling? What needs attention in me? So that would be the number one thing that I would say. And then secondly, share it. And whether you're an artist or a musician and share it through your art or your music, or whether you're just a person who is going through a hard thing, speak it to somebody. And if it's not a person, then maybe it's a tree. But again, that act of getting what you suffer with outside of yourself gives you some relief. It gives you a way to look at yourself and see maybe from a different perspective. And so then my other top three things are when you're feeling down, if you've given yourself time to look at it and you've shared it with somebody, then offer something to somebody else. Sometimes that takes us out of the moment of the pain and we see somebody else's pain or we facilitate somebody else's feeling better. That would be number one. And then number two would be to learn something new. Because learning something new gives us another mirror into who we are or what we might become. It can be exciting. And then finally, make something. And actually that should be at the top of my list as an artist, because making something always shifts us in some way. And sometimes it is just you're making something and you're engaged in that and it gives you a moment of rest. Sometimes that making of the thing gives you deep insight into what you're going through. Sometimes that making of a thing generates beauty or conversation with somebody else or a mirror about yourself. So those are my 5 things. Be with the thing, share it with somebody, offer something to somebody, learn something, and make something.
I'm actually think I'm going to open it up to Q&A now because you've both, I think, addressed a lot of the questions that I already had, and I think I'm itching to hear what other people want to talk about as well. So does anyone want to start with a question or a comment?
So I have a question for Maria. And obviously you've been making your art with your mouth for a very long time, but I'm wondering about the time period between when the accident happened and when you found yourself taking pleasure in art. How did you cope, or how was that for you? And what was the transition really that helped you go from whatever you were suffering with internally to actively making art?
Actually, it was interesting because before our accident, we lived in Oregon City, and I have my younger sister that lived out in Beaverton. And so Mike and I had already thought about moving out this way, and we had the accident, and then we moved out this way to be closer to her. Well, at the time, she had a 3-year-old and a 6-year-old. And what really started happening was the bond that I started creating with them. And they would come over to our house all the time. So we'd babysit and we'd play bingo or the game, and then their prize was getting something out of the junk drawer. I mean, you know, they'd set up their own little offices, and you know, I spent a lot of time with them. And with the computer, that's when things started, you know, watching on the computer or printing off coloring pages for them. Or I also formed good, strong relationships with a lot of the neighbors. One lady down the street that I got real close to, her brother had ALS, he's still actually alive.
And so she found a bond with me with the wheelchair. So I'd go down to her house, and she had 4 kids. And so I would read the youngest one's stories.
Mm.
I would help with math with one of the other children that she had. And now all 4 of them are out of the house and gone, but I formed really good bonds with them. And then there's a neighbor across the street, and she would, I would do little puzzles and stuff and print them off for her because she had a daycare. And if I needed something, that any of the neighbors would be there to help me. So I really did a lot of bonding, and I had the luxury of being able to enjoy being with other kids and being, helping them and teach them with things.
Connecting with other people and connecting with kids. That's wonderful. I have to add too that I was talking to you two before this started, and it's clear that you also have a great sense of humor. So a sense of humor, I would imagine, has helped as well.
I was just going to echo exactly what Maria said. Taking the focus off of, well, and Maya said it too, taking the focus off of what you're going through and helping someone else is so therapeutic for you. And, also remembering that there's someone who has it much worse than you and someone who has it much better than you. So realizing those 2 things and being grateful for what you have is huge. And then I can't remember the second thing that Maya said or that Maria said. What was the second thing you said?
Well, what I wrote down was make the space to feel, share it with someone else, help someone else, learn something new, and make something. Connecting with other people and kids, I think.
Oh, yeah, helping people do things, and then also, spending time in nature, and then just doing um, doing something, learning something different, switches your brain and changes your neuroplasticity. So you're not focusing on, your pain and that cycle and those kind of things. So it's just something I've learned over my decade of my migraines and then my 25 years of chronic pain. So
Thank you for sharing that.
I have a question for each of the speakers. So when you receive the the inquiry, how the arts can help us heal and overcome difficult times, can you speak to what came to mind for you? Um, Similar to what you've been talking about, but upon that first receiving that and going, is this something I could present on, and what came to mind for you?
What came to mind for me was how uplifting it's been for me to be able to share my work. And just we would do the open studios, and to have anyone come. And what we started to do was I put a blank canvas out on the patio, and we drew houses all over. And yeah, I'll try to find the link. And everyone got a chance to paint their own house. And so it was a real fun interaction. Just that, the interaction with people and seeing how they're painting their own little house, and just the involvement and talking to others about my artwork when they did come.
What came to mind for me was how wonderfully wide a topic that is, because in my experience, there's, art has helped me survive so many things. It's done incredible, magnificent healing work. I see people doing one-on-one and in groups, how art has changed us politically, we could say in the bigger picture. The topic seemed really wide and wonderfully exciting. So that's what came to mind first for me.
I often think about the role of artists in our society, and those of us who are artists understand that artists have a tendency to be the ones that are on the forefront of whatever's going on that is controversial or difficult, or it is through the arts that things become revealed, that voices are heard, and things like that. And so when you apply this topic, how arts can heal and overcome difficult times, when you put it in the context of artists being the ones sort of at the front of that, how do you see the current pandemic and artists being at the front of that, like addressing that?
That's a really interesting question. And I say that because a number of my clients are artists for obvious reasons. And one of the things that has been just rampant and as rabid as the coronavirus itself has been a disconnection from creative self. And I've seen it across artists. I've seen it with scientists. I've seen it with a number of people who are normally very active in their worlds and in their communities and creating. And, I had one young client who came to me and she said, I've been waiting my whole life for the time to write my musical. And now I've got days on end and I cannot pick up a pen. And I've heard this in so many ways from so many people. So I think it's an interesting idea that the artists are at the forefront of expression. But actually, one of the things that happens when we feel oppressed or depressed or despair or confusion or a disconnection from what we're what feels normal and familiar to us is we can lose our connection to our creative selves. And there's a lot of, well, what can I do to fix it? What can I do to make it go? How can I push myself? And my stance on that is it's the opposite. We've all been pushing ourselves most of our lives. And creativity comes from a place of stillness and a place of connectedness, not from a place of pushing and urgency, right? I think probably most of us have had the experience of, I got this deadline, why can't I do this thing? And yet when we're walking in nature, or when we're looking at our fish in the pond, as Maria talked about, creativity bubbles up. So I think that sometimes, such as now, giving oneself the space not to create is the most creative thing you can do. Does that make sense? Did
Absolutely.
I answer the question?
And I'm in that boat. Like, I'm seeing all these people who are creating and they're like, oh, I created this amazing, I wrote a new book. And I'm like, I have sat still. I haven't written a new song or anything like that. But so it's nice to hear that that as well. Okay, so that with knowing that, and there being this place where, okay, so let's now pretend that you are in a creative space, that you are able to access that without pressure, without any barriers. Somehow you're in that place where you can create during these times. What are the things that you observe, artists, what have you seen artists doing that has been really compelling? That's like, wow, maybe there are some group of artists that aren't creating, and that's a good thing, and other artists that are creating, and it's interesting to see what they're doing. What are you seeing out there?
I can give you one really quick, fabulous example. So I saw recently a video from a performing artist, and he's an actor, and here he is stuck at home. He's not acting. He can't interact with other actors or writers or producers. So what he did was he turned his 4x4 foot closet into a tiny theater, and he put the camera up above, and he did a performance piece. And this is another thing that I was going to say. If you're stuck as an artist, one thing you can try is something you've never done. If you're a visual artist, sing. If you're a singer, pick up a paintbrush or dig a ditch and plant a flower. Do something that's really different from your normal art form. But so what this guy did was he just turned his camera on and he intuitively and without planning created a performance piece, which really is a bit of a dance. But what it shows is this incredible restriction being inside this box, and it starts out restricted, and then as he goes on you see him utilizing the box and becoming friends with the box and making this magical wonderful thing happen inside this small box. And it's such a metaphor for what we've all had to do in some way, whatever box we've been put in or feel ourselves in. What can we do with that, and how we started out more depressed and people are becoming more creative in the recent months, right? So that's an example of what's happened in the pandemic. Oh, I could tell you one other really quick example. This isn't pandemic related, but it's entrapment related. One of my most inspiring teachers, Tom Lewis, when I was in high school, was an artist, and he was imprisoned because he was one of the Catonsville Nine burning the draft papers and during the 60s. And so he was in jail and he was not allowed art supplies. So what he did was he saved the white paper cups that he was given coffee in under his bed, and the coffee sticks, which were these bland, throat depressor sticks so that people wouldn't kill themselves or something. So he saved coffee at different heights, different amounts of coffee. And as the coffee went down and evaporated, he had different colors of brown ink. He chewed the sticks to become paintbrushes, and he saved cups, dry cups, and cut them into pieces, and piece by piece created this art, this incredible drawing, this huge drawing. And little by little, he's handed out these pieces of the paper cups to his visitors who came. And at the end of his jail term, he produced this beautiful paper cup, coffee painted painting of what he'd been through, of the burning of the papers and all of that. This political statement. And that was my first experience of how art can make an incredible impact as a political statement. But again, that was a thing of someone being in a very restricted circumstance, feeling like, and finding a way to create something that he would never have created had he been at home and free.
That's really incredible.
I actually don't think I can add as much because Maya is very well at speaking, and I enjoyed listening to her. I'm not in touch with as many clients or see very many people in that sense with as far as the virus going on. And there's just so many different angles that people can take this. And just as far as what's positive, I have a niece that she started getting into stones or different elements that you wouldn't, like Maya said, get into unless you have the space and the time to do it. So I think I'm just gonna go with that because Maya covered very, very well.
Okay, so Stacy mentioned something when she was introducing herself, and I'm having the same experience. Sleeping weird hours. I'm up all night. I'm asleep in the day, and then I'm up in the early morning, and then I'm awake. It's like my time and sleep are completely disrupted. So from the perspective of the topic we're talking about, can you speak to that a little bit? Like this whole thing of like time being morphing and how that could actually be a benefit to creativity or not.
Can I say something about that? I'm not the guest speaker, but it kind of ties in with what Maya was saying about letting things flow and be, letting yourself be where you're at. And I've also had lots of sleepless nights in the last few weeks. And I had a realization the other night, like, go with it. You're not sleeping. if I lay here and worry about why I can't get to sleep, it's just going to be worse. And I've had some really amazing like insights and brainstorms in the middle of the night when I've let myself say, oh gosh, this is frustrating, but you know what, I'm going to go with it. So I'm sure Maya and Maria could speak to it much better, but it kind of just tied in with what Maya was saying earlier about letting yourself be where you're at.
Hi, sorry, I was wrestling with the chat because it's only going to Stacy for some reason. Sorry, Stacy. I'm not sure what I really have to say about that, other than if I'm awake at night, I don't lie there trying to go to sleep. I get up and do something, and often I get up and make something because I don't really know what to do because my brain is sleepy. What I want to speak to, if it's okay, it's a little off topic, is the use of art in balancing our brains, which speaks a little bit to art working with people who are neurodiverse in some way. And, you know, you probably heard it said that art is one of those things that works with both the left and the right brain. And it engages our linear thought process and our, you know, action one step after another, and it engages our spatial, more spiritual, more emotional brain. And so one of the benefits of making something, whether you're making a song or decorating a Christmas tree, is that you are engaging both halves of your brain. And sometimes when we are depressed or emotionally upheaved, we are stuck in one part of a brain or another. And it's not just the left and the right side, it's from the back to the front, from the amygdala, which is our fear-based brain, to our prefrontal cortex, which is our thinking and you know, cognitive brain. So making something just in and of itself, never mind whether it represents something or is, you know, you're trying to heal yourself, is going to bring your whole being up a notch. And so jumping again to neurodiversity, one of the things that I've been doing lately is working with people who are neurodiverse. And by that, we might talk about people on the autism spectrum or people who are dealing with other things, not talking about mental illness, but a difference of brain, a different way that the brain functions. And specifically, I'll just share a quick story about a young client, a 10-year-old boy who is on the autism spectrum. He can speak, he's interactive. He would be what we would have called in the past Asperger's syndrome. But he does have a lot of difficulty communicating and reading people's facial expressions, etc. And so what we did was we took a basket full of different colored streamers, because we knew he was going through something, and said, okay, here's some streamers. Tell us what these different colors are in your feelings, And even though he couldn't speak to us about his feelings, he could say mad, and he could say sad, and he could say happy. And I said, okay, so where should we wrap you up with the mad? Where's the mad? Tummy. So we wrapped around his tummy with the streamers. And then where should we put the sad? And then he would say, my shoulder and my heart, or he would point to a part of his body, and we would wrap him up with the streamers until he was just a mummy wrapped in streamers. And he thought it was great fun. And then we said, well, what's something you could do to get out of these feelings? And he sat there for a minute as if he didn't know what to do. And suddenly he burst into laughter, and he just started tearing off all the streamers. And it was a huge emotional shift. And his mom reported several days later that he had been more at peace and he was able to communicate better, and a lot of things had shifted for him. So a simple thing that's you know, a playful creative project, it works for anybody. But you know, if there's somebody who is less inclined to express emotionally through words, and you want to know what's going on, you can use the words and they can point to the colors and those kinds of things. So I just wanted to share that as one way that you can use creativity in a playful way that also has a healing effect.
That was a fantastic example. Well, do we want to have a few more questions? And then do we feel like maybe a few more questions and then we're full, full for the moment? I'm feeling full in a good way.
I guess this isn't really a question, it's just a resource I'd love to share. That is a book called Wintering: The Power of Rest and Retreat in Difficult Times by Catherine May. It's a 2020 release, so it's in the time of COVID, and it's it's kind of addressing all of these topics, and it's beautifully written. It's exquisitely written. The author has Asperger's, so that kind of made me tune into that. But I seldom read a book that is so beautifully written and it's so resonant with what all of you are sharing in this amazing presentation.
Thank you so much.
Yes, thank you. And that reminds me that I wanted to share, I think you did share my website somewhere on there, but the central page that comes up when you go to my website is the Rest and Renewal portal. And so that book reminded me, and thank you for sharing that book, that you can go and look and see all my Rest and Renewal offerings there, and you don't have to get them from me, but to just look and see if there's something that you might want to investigate in your life anywhere online. Resting and renewal is, I think, part of what this pandemic is offering us an opportunity to find. And how we rest and how we renew is very individual, but what a good plan, rest and renewal.
I just want to say thank you to both of you ladies for stepping up and doing this and being vulnerable and speaking about difficult parts of your life in public and sharing your stories and, you know, being a light for others who need help and need hope. And this is a way to get that. So thank you. And thank you, Beth, for putting this together.
Yes, thank you, Beth, very much. And all of you for being here.
You are very welcome. I'm going to have to watch this over again, maybe more than once. But thank you so much. I will just end on this note. When we were putting this together, I was Googling quotes about art and healing, and I found this one, and I thought it was funny and also true. It's by the famous German philosopher Friedrich Nietzsche. He said, "We have art, so we shall not die of reality." And I think that quote summed up this last year for most of us. So hopefully that felt a little humorous. So thank you so much, everyone, for joining. Have a blessed.
Thank you. Thank you for letting us be here.
Yeah, Maria and Maya, what you shared was really powerful. Yeah, thank you so much.